So this particular lecture that I'm getting ready to do is based upon some of the progress that some of you have shared with me. Some of you are doing very well. I'm very pleased with where some of your projects are going based on those of you that have sent me examples of some of your work, though I see a couple things that I'd just like to address visually to clear up any confusion or questions that you might have. Now, for the most part, the shapes, the simplest shapes, which are typically spheres and ellipses, as well as like cubes and prisms and that sort of thing. Straight up round shapes and straight up cornered or straight edged shapes tend to be the easiest to produce. Things start to get a little bit tricky once you start combining curved shapes and cornered shapes, such as cylinders or cones, that type of thing. So that's what I'd like to address at this point in time. So I'm going to create a couple new layers to sort of create and produce some examples of these, and I'll show you an example of what I've been seeing in some of the student examples that you've been sharing with me, and I'll show what I'd like to see instead and why. So I'll start with a cone. I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call it my cone. And I'll create another layer. Call it my cone shadow. Okay, so cone, if you think of like an ice cream cone, in terms of the way that you would produce it within Photoshop, it's going to be, essentially, it's going to be a triangle with an ellipse on the bottom when you put it together. Let me display my rulers. So on a PC, that's Control R. On a Mac, it would be Command R. And I'm going to just use the rulers as a guide to help me make as accurate a shape as I can for the cone. So I just want to make sure that it's symmetric. I'll make a tall cone. All right. And just to give myself some added guides. My move tool just to adjust. So I'm going to have this region be my tall, narrow cone. So I'll start by creating the bottom, the ellipse. All right, so that's going to be the bottom of my cone. Now, what I've seen some students do is they're treating each selection as a separate unit. So I'm seeing students take this shape and color it in, and I'm not going to be really specific on my shading here. I'm just going to illustrate what I'm showing. So I've created the bottom portion of my cone. And then I'll create the top portion of my cone. All right, so what you're seeing here, if you put the two shapes together, I am getting a cone shape. However, the issue that I'm running into is, I've got this sort of seam where they meet, and you can clearly see that the selection, isn't quite matching. But also, you can see that I didn't do it on separate layers the way I should have, but you can see that if I were to erase this middle section, I would still have two areas that are not matching in terms of tone or color. So what I'd like to see, and I'm gonna do this again in two separate ways. I'm backing up to where it's just the bottom of the cone. If I wanted to, and I'm actually going to illustrate this briefly, I can do this in two separate ways. I can either have the cone like I'm looking down on the cone, or I can draw the cone this way, which makes it look like the cone is tilted on its side and I can see its bottom. Okay, either way is fine. So if I were to give this a try, let's say that I'll create a cone bottom. Get my paintbrush, paint that in. And then I'll deselect, Control D or Command D. Then, to make the top portion of the cone, again, I'm going to go the same route as I did before, but now I'm kind of treating it sort of the way that I would have treated it with the sphere and its shadow. So now if I'm coloring the cone portion in on its own, because they're on separate layers, I could highlight the portion that I want to change and then delete the part I don't want. Okay, so now you can see that we have defined separation. The cone bottom and the cone itself are separate. If I wanted to do it in the sense where I can't see the bottom and the cone is just one large single unit all by itself, back it up in my history here, this is where you combine the selections together. So I have the bottom portion started. This is where I add to what I've currently got, and it makes that cone shape for me. So now all I would need to worry about is coloring it in on its own. See how I did that? Now also, a nice thing about having the selection, if I have the cone created, I still have the selection. I undid my deselect so that I could pull that up. So at this point I'd like to do the shadow. I'm going to go to my shadow layer and I'm just going to color it in separate. Okay, so what's happening here is I'm actually getting two of the same cones. But another way that I can go about taking that shadow and making sure that it matches is I can go up to Edit and pick Free Transform to take my shadow and tilt it, reposition it. This is making sure that my shadow is going to match. This could also be a good opportunity to resize the shadow if I needed to do so. Not too bad. And then again, same situation as before. If I need to remove portions, select the region. There we go. Helps if I have the correct options picked. Select the region, then pick the opposite layer to help you remove what you want. Oh, I should reverse this actually. I should select from the cone, then pick the shadow, and remove the portion of the shadow that I want. And I've got some parts that are sticking out over here that I shouldn't have. This is where maybe the eraser tool would be a good thing to use. So now I've got the shadow all by itself, and if I needed to darken that up, I could do so. Ooh. little too dark. There we go. Not so bad. And you can see that I don't have any seams. So I'm kind of taking some of the tricks that I showed you with the sphere where you're removing the parts you don't need, and we're combining multiple selection tools at one time to help achieve the shape that we're looking for. I'll go ahead and create a group for these two. I'll move them to one side so I can make another shape like a cylinder. And a quick note about guides. Guides are just there to help you compose what you're doing. They don't print out. If you were to print this image, when you save your JPEGs, it's not going to affect the way that the image looks. It's not attached to anything. It's just there to help you within Photoshop to create your imagery. So if I were going to create a cylinder, again, I would treat it very much the same way that I did the cone, except there would be an ellipse. Oops. There would be an ellipse both on the top and on the bottom, both sides. So let me go ahead and do that. So we'll do spelling that wrong, I'm not worried about it. So same idea, start with an ellipse. I'll go ahead and paint it in. Now a cylinder, if you think about the shapes, it's like the rectangular marquee tool and the elliptical marquee tool kind of stacked. Now, I'm not just going to add a rectangle to the side, because if you've looked at any cylindrical object, it can be a soup can or a coffee cup or a tin of Pringles, you know, anything that's cylindrical, it's not just going to be round along the top edge, but also around the bottom edge. So to illustrate what I've been seeing some of this stuff, which again, you're making the right kind of shape, but I don't want to see the edges, I don't want to see the seams, I don't want to see the overlap. I want it to look like a solid object rather than pieces of objects that kind of make the end result. Okay, so I'm going to show you the easiest way to do that. I'm going to go ahead and keep my cylinder top the way that it was. But then I'm going to grab a selection tool. I'm going to switch layers. If you recall, if you have a selection tool active as your tool that you're currently using, you can move a selection around. Then I can add to the selection I want to alter. You see how that looks much closer to what the shape is that I'm wanting to use? Then I'll switch to the correct layer. I'll go ahead and paint that in. And then same thing, switch to the layer, actually, here we go, deselect, grab the top, switch to the layer we want to remove it from, hit the delete key, deselect. All right, so again, now we have a cylinder that is much more closely matching what a cylinder would look like in real life versus looking like pieces of objects that are sort of pieced and attached together that kind of look like the shape, but not as much as they could. So I'm just going in and touching up my shading here. These are much cleaner, much more composed, much more along the direction or the lines that I'd like to see these types of shapes approached. So for the few of you that offered me the opportunity to critique your work in progress, thank you very much. You know, you helped me realize that I needed to be a little bit more clear in the way that I was describing or conveying the way that some of these shapes needed to be created. If you don't just want to draw, you know, a rectangle shape to be the shadow, again, I'm going to use the shapes that I've already got. So I'll select the cylinder, top, and then I'll shift select. You see how the plus sign pops up next to my cursor? Shift select to select the rest of my cylinder. Go to my shadow layer, paint some sort of shadow in. Again, it's okay that it overlaps because I'm going to change where it's located. Deselect. Control T pops up free transform. It's the same as going to edit free transform. And then same idea. I can grab it, I can reposition it, I'll squish it to maybe match what the base is doing. There we go. Hit enter or return to set it. Then I pick the area it overlaps with and go back to the shadow, hit delete. And then if I want to make updates, make it darker, lighter, whatnot, again, just reselect the layer it's on and make any adjustments I need to make. Nice and clean, huh? I hope this helps clarify some information. Again, if you continue to have questions, I would like to hear them. I'm here to help. I'm here to make sure that you know how to use the tools and you know what you're doing. So by all means, even if you think it's a silly question, ask. You know, it's only a silly question if I covered it and you weren't listening the first time. So don't feel embarrassed to ask a question that seems like it should be simple, because sometimes, you know, again, Photoshop is a complex software. It's easy to get lost, and I'm here to help guide you. So again, best of luck. I hope to see more examples of your work before the due date next week.